groups. This deck will be available for anybody who wants to review it afterwards and see if they can find where they thought they had a question. But I think I'll cover everything and we'll hold questions to the end. This whole topic has been of interest to me since I was a ham, but more recently when I wrote the emergency power energy choices for the amateur radio ARRL publication, and also the article in QST May 2019 of having your own solar microgrid. There are 6 disruptive technologies in energy and power, and we are so far past 60 hertz power that it's amazing, and yet most people aren't even aware of it. Universal power supplies now, almost all of them will work from 100 to 240 volts AC, and that also means 100 to 330 volts DC, because there is no line transformer. It's all done at DC to DC switching. So that's the new universal emergency power voltages, have stuff that'll run on that. We have LED lighting everywhere. Solar power is now cheaper than coal and gas. It's about half the cost of your utility. Now, you still have to stay connected to the grid if you want to get that kind of cost savings, but and then we have hybrids. Every hybrid has a 50 kW generator just sitting there in your driveway. And electric vehicles are now better, faster, cleaner, quieter, safer, cheaper to buy, cheaper to operate, and cheaper to maintain than the average gas car. We're 10 years into the EV revolution, and most people don't even know that there's 60 full-size models on the market from every major manufacturer because they don't advertise them. They still want to keep selling people big SUVs with high markups, which is where their profit center is. And then you've probably heard of the whole house battery backup, the Tesla Powerwall. I have a lot of comments on that. And so what is in common? It's all high voltage DC. So energy is more than a hobby. It can save you lots of money. This is kind of an analogy of my amateur radio. Started in 1965 by rewinding a DC alternator, 6-volt DC alternator, to make it produce 120 volts, 60 hertz. And then you see in 1970, my senior project, upper left corner, was to build an electric car for the cross-country clean air car race. And then down in 2007, middle right, I started buying junk Priuses and fixing them up with solar panels and batteries. And finally, in 2010, I went solar. In 2013, I replaced the oil burner with a heat pump. And in 2017, I finally got my first real off-the-shelf electric vehicle, and I absolutely love it. Emergency power and energy. Emergency response depends on power and energy. Not only can we bring communications to an event, but we also bring emergency power. They depend on us. This is how I typically show up at field day. A solar power trailer, my plug-in hybrid that has a huge battery in it, and my communications shelter. So if you want some serious portable power, think electric vehicles. Every hybrid has a 50 kW generator, and every plug-in electric vehicle has from 16 to 85 kilowatt hours of battery storage. Remember, the average American home uses 1 kilowatt hour per hour. And so that's a hell of a lot of battery storage. Here it puts it in perspective. A Nissan Leaf has 40 kilowatt hours of battery storage. It's like 40 12-volt batteries. And that car, costing only $9,000, 3 years old, used off lease, has 3 times the power of a Tesla Powerwall and costs half as much. Plus, you get to use it every day, not the 4 hours a year that your $14,000 investment in a Tesla battery provides you power. So anyway, this is my most recent project. And it was supposed to be published in CQ of October, but I don't get that magazine, and they've never sent me an author's copy, no matter how many times I've asked. So I hope somebody has seen it. I haven't. They didn't even let me proof it. I sent it in, and I never heard anything until they said it's published. And of course, I wanted to make changes. But anyhow, I modified my Chevy Volt to hold the hatch about halfway up so that I could put flat solar panels across the top and have 240 watts of solar power for portable operation. The trunk still opens normally, and the total modification of the car are just 3 pieces of plywood around the back that can be removed at any time. So again, same thing. Any hybrid has an equivalent of 50,000 watt generator. Plus, It's a car. You get to use it every day. Now this slide has an orange, a gold border around it because this, if you don't remember anything else, remember this slide. 12 solar panels costing about $1,200 can fully charge every plug-in hybrid on the market. There's 32 of them fully every day forever with no dependence on the oil, no price fluctuations, no having to go to the gas station. You just plug into your own solar powers and you have transportation for life. Now, it's a whole new world of power. On the left is what we used to think of as a, what is that, a 9 amp power supply. And now the same power supply fits in 1/10 of the space and 1/10 of the mass. And in addition, they will take any operating voltage on the input from 100 to 240 volts AC. And of course, anybody who understands how they work, that'll also work on 70 to 330 volts DC. That's because all modern switching power supplies, first thing they do is full wave rectify the input, and then when that input happens to be 240, that generates 336 volts DC to the switching regulator, and everything runs from that. Now here's an example of how I use that for emergency power. This is the Golden Packet event. It's the third Saturday in July, and we take APRS operators to the top of 15 mountains from Maine to Georgia to try to, in 4 hours, send as many messages as we can from Maine to Georgia using our portable equipment that we brought to the top of the mountain. Only 2 or 3 of us actually have to climb anything. Everybody else just drives to the top, sits there for 4 hours, and operates. Okay, but how do I operate at the top of 100-foot? This is my location. I've chosen in Governor Dick Hill. It's a 100-foot observation tower that has vertical ladders inside that they let the public climb. It turns out the ladders only go up 7 feet to a landing, and then over to the next one and over to the next one. So if you ever fall, you only fall 7 feet. But so how do I get power to the top of that? My first year, I took solar power, and of course it rained the whole day. So fortunately, we took all kinds of lead acid batteries, and boy, was that a monster, because you got to carry it more than a half a mile up to the base of the tower, and then you got to carry it up the tower. So what I started using was single wire earth return, and that is simply you drive a stake in the ground at the car, use a, I assume you can see my cursor, use a cigarette lighter plug-in inverter, give you about 140 watts of 60 hertz AC power, run that into a mini box that has just 2 capacitors and 2 diodes that doubles that to 330 volts DC, and then clip that to a ground rod and the binding post, and then 3,200 feet of wire that fits under the seat, goes up to another outlet box that has nothing in it but a duplex outlet, and then you can plug in any modern universal power supply into that, and it'll work just fine. Of course, this is not approved by the National Electric Code, and you're dealing with 300 volts DC on a piece of number 22 hookup wire. But this is what it looks like in schematic form. Anybody can do it. We're just taking from 12 volts, inverting to 330 volts DC, and then distributing it. And you'll notice that the loss is not in the ground. The loss is in the wire, because the farther you go, the more of the earth there is between you and the remote site. And so what limits you is the actual resistance in the wire. It turns out when we're drawing about 100 watts from the laptop power supply up on top of the platform, the original 330 volts DC has dropped down to about 100 volts DC, but it still powers everything we had. This is kind of what it looks like. Here's where I am. It's the top of the tower. We operate for 4 hours until we get the Golden Packet, which is a message from Mount Katahdin in Maine down to Springer Mountain in Georgia. And so field day to me is emergency power, and I just love that. So started adding solar panels to everything that I have. The typical ham dream world is to have a 10 kW generator in their backyard so that they can watch their $7,000 to $15,000 investment rust to dust, and probably mostly not work what they need it. All of that to provide less than $1 of electricity during a power outage. That's what 8 hours of the typical American 1.2 kW house load draws, is about $1 of electricity once a year for 8 hours. Every hybrid has the 50 kW generator. So I brought, in the Prius, the battery is a 220 volt DC battery. So I brought that out to the back of the trunk and put a special connector on there so that only I can plug into it. And on the right, I just hook up a standard 12 volt 60 hertz inverter to give me a kW of AC, and that's more than enough to run the refrigerator and all the lights in the house during a power outage. On the right is my 1200 watt inverter, costs $99, and that powers my house during a power outage. On the left, if you can find them, if you can find a UPS supply that operates on high voltage batteries, you can hook that directly to the Prius high voltage battery and get up to 5 kilowatts or 6 kW real time out of that system. It turns out, and every hybrid then has to have a high voltage battery down to 12 volt down converter. And they typically provide about 100 amps of 12 volt power, because that can provide all the power that all the accessories in the car use at 12 volts under worst case condition, heater running max, rain pouring down, windshield wipers, and everything else. It turns out the volt, once I got the volt, its DC to DC converter is 2 kW. So that's 2 kW of power I can draw directly out of the 12 volt battery, and none of it actually comes from the 12 volt battery. It's all coming through this switching converter down from the high voltage of the car. Every hybrid and plug-in electric vehicle has that kind of a converter in it. And that's the beauty of what I talk about. I'm not talking about going in and digging to the high voltage battery and killing yourself or somebody else or whatever. Just tap in at 12 volts. Plenty of power if you're not greedy. I came up with my own power connector so that nobody can plug into my outlets, my 200 or my high voltage outlets, unless they have a matching plug. And you make that from a standard 89-cent duplex outlet and an 89-cent plug. And if you feel comfortable that the device you have on that plug will work on universal voltages from 100 to 240 or 340 volts DC, then you drill a hole in it and then you can plug it in. Anyhow, that's how I powered a field day one time. Now, a lot of people say, well, I can do that with my gas guzzler. No, you can't. A typical gas guzzler has a 60 amp alternator. And when it's at idle, it's only producing about 30 amps or about 400 watts of average power. And the engine has to run 100% of the time. And the thing about plug-in or hybrids is that you just turn it on. You draw all the power you want out of the 12 volt battery, and the car will take care of itself. It'll start whatever it needs to maintain the battery. It'll shut off when the loads are light. It's just like, you know, those modern inverting Honda generators. It'll just take care of itself. Just draw whatever power you want. And a lot of people say, well, yeah, but what do you do during a power outage with your electric car? Actually, I'd rather have an electric car during a power outage, because you know the first thing that goes during a power outage is gas pumps. Gas lines, and everybody panics, gets in line, and nobody can get gas. And you say, well, but how does an EV charge? This is a satellite picture. Remember, I worked at the Naval Academy with satellites, and in the upper left-hand corner is the picture of New Jersey and Long Island during normal nighttime. And on the right is after Sandy came through and really wiped them out several years ago. But if you'll notice, even in the areas totally wiped out, there's still lights on somewhere. Where's my cursor? In fact, you usually, you see most of the houses and everything else, but you can usually see somebody with the lights on. And if somebody has the lights on, you can go ask if you could plug in, and the total charge current you draw from them from a standard 120 volt outlet is only 20 cents an hour. And so you'd be happy to pay them a couple of quarters to charge up. So anyhow, EVs are now better, cleaner, faster, quieter, safer, cheaper to buy, cheaper to operate, and cheaper to maintain than the average gas car, if you consider the federal state incentives that are available. And then all the other advantages are shown on the right. So my energy awakening with respect to electric vehicles began in 2007 when I started buying these salvage Priuses and fixing up myself and my kids with one. And most of what people think they know about EVs is likely wrong and completely outdated. Everything has changed even in the last 10 years, and yet you'll have people come up to you and say, oh, they cost too much. Well, that was 10 years ago. So anyhow, just think of those. They're all wrong. 95% of the energy in our cars we spend driving locally, and that's typically a trip of under 10 miles or so, or on average, The American average mileage is 40 miles a day, year round. Now, I'm going to complete. I stuck this in right before the brief. I've been trying to get the ARRL to let me donate 2 EV charging stations to put on the fence there in front of the W1AW station. I will donate the charger and everything else if they'll just run the power out to it. They already have power on an extension cord coming out to an outlet in the grass that they plug into their comm van that is parked to the left of this car. But they come back and says, well, no, it's too soon, you know. EV cars are in the future. No, we're 10 years into the EV car revolution, and now there's over 15 billion electric vehicle highway miles on the road, and so far, not a single, generally, no one has had to replace their battery because of age, or wear out. I mean, sure, there are batteries that fail, but almost all of them fail under warranty during the first 8 years or 100,000 miles, and then you get a new battery, and you know, once you get over those bathtub initial failures, it'll last the life of the car. The longest running Chevy Volt now has 247,000 miles on it, and the battery still has 80% capacity. The other thing I want ARL to do is to go solar. Do you realize that ARL spends $8,000 per month on electricity? That's $1 million every 10 years, just throwing it away to the utility. Whereas if you took half of that and invested it in solar, that would be free electric power for headquarters forever. And that gives you an extra $100K per year for other ARL projects. So now there are over 62 EVs now on the market in 2020. I already said it, half cost less than the average gas car with incentives, and now half have ranges over 350 miles. And you can buy used ones from $6,000 to $12,000. My 3-year-old Volt coming off lease only cost me $12,000, and it looked brand new, only had 50,000 miles on it. So I've taken that list of cars and I've sorted them by range, and you can see that exactly half of them have ranges over 350 miles. But if you look at it closely, you'll notice that half are all plug-in hybrids, which means they have the local daily electric miles, but they also have a gas tank for gas backup. And the Toyota Prius plug-in Prime is only $23,000 after incentives, and it has 640 miles of range. I can drive almost to Chicago and never have to stop for gas. And yet it's an electric car for local travel. This is that list sorted by cost, and more than half cost less than the $35,000 average gas car. So what I try to tell people to do, I'm not saying go out and buy an EV, but be ready, do your research. As soon as your car gives up the ghost and you've got to go out and buy a car, don't just do a knee-jerk reaction to replace the same thing. The gas car is dead. 2018 was the peak of gas car sales and has been going down ever since November of 2018, and EV sales are exploding. Imagine what a new gas car bought today is going to be worth in 5 years when most of the cars are EVs. So here are all the 25 purely electric. These have the big batteries that can run for from 100 to 300 miles on a single charge, and 40% cost less than the average gas car. This is the second page of that listing, and it's all of the plug-in hybrids, which are really great deals because you don't have very many gas miles, but the best one, of course, is the Chevy Volt, the #1 selling electric vehicle for the last 8 years, with more sold than any other car, and because it has 50 daily miles of electric range, which means I do all of my daily commuting purely on electricity, plug it into a 120-volt outlet when I get home, and it's full every morning. But if I need to go drive up to New York City, I just get in and drive. And when the battery's out and the gas tank gets low, I pull over to the gas station like anybody up and fill up. So, but if you're into pickup trucks, this is the year. Well, 2020 was supposed to be the year. Most of them are actually coming out next year. There are going to be 5 fully electric trucks coming out next year. And you have to see why. It's just not cost effective to build a gas engine anymore when an electric car only has one moving part, and the maintenance is only 10% of that of a gas car. And you've got to divorce yourself from the idea of a battery as a tank. It's not a tank. A tank is something you fill up and then drive for a week until you get near empty, and then fill up, then drive around, look for a gas station while you're using the car, and spend 5 minutes standing there at the pump filling it up. Whereas an electric vehicle is something that you drive, and whenever you park it, you plug into a 120-volt outlet. And so every time you get in the car, it's always fully topped off and ready to go for whatever its electric vehicle mileage is. Now, here's one of the problems when you go knock on somebody's door and say, hey, I don't have any power and I see your lights are on, can I plug in my electric car? And they see the typical $40 fill up. This was back when gas was more expensive. And think that, yeah, if I let you plug in, it's going to add $40 to my electric bill. When in fact, the cost of electricity in most states is about 20 cents an hour. Or if you plug in, say, for 8 hours, about $1.60 a day to get a full charge. Every EV can charge from any outlet because they all come with a standard 120-volt charge cord, and you don't need no stinking $8,000 charging station. The only reason you hear so much about charging station is it's like windows, aluminum siding, and all the other stuff that third-party sellers can try to sell you that you don't need, so that they can make a profit off the current EV explosion. If you can plug in, you can charge your electric car. The typical, EVs are really the only practical way of having an EV is if you can charge at home. If you don't have a place to park at home and you don't have a place to plug in at home, an EV is probably not for you, because you're not going to be able to share charging stations, or if you do, it'll be forever emotional battery arguments with everybody else in your parking lot over who's overusing the charge cord, who hasn't moved their car as soon as they're finished. You got to go out and move your car in the middle of the night because it's done charging and everything else. You don't want that. So forget what you hear about EV charging stations. EVs are simply charged when they're plugged in. And here is the typical 7 days a week and 0 to 100% of every day. And the green is all the time that the car is parked at home. The red is all the time that the car is parked at work. And right there, that's over 22 hours a day on average that an electric car can be plugged in and charging. And people say, well, but I can fill up my gas car in 5 minutes. Who cares? With an electric vehicle, charging is a parking evolution. It's something you do while you park, and it's completely out of sight and out of mind. It doesn't take but 5 seconds out of your time just to plug it in. And so that's what the thing across the very top, the blue across the very top, is when you're actually driving the car. It's about 4% of the total time that you're in a typical car. But with a gas car, people think, wow, it's convenient to go fill up in 5 minutes. Well, yeah, because that's the only time they can fill up is while they're using the car and they're late for someplace else. Whereas an EV just plugs in and doesn't worry about it. Every time they get in the car, it's full. So I think of public charging as like a spare gas can in the trunk. Something that you don't need most of the time. It's kind of nice to have. And so I'm on a mantra. Whenever I see an outdoor outlet anywhere, church, school, overnight B&B or anything, I knock on the door and I say, do you realize you already have an EV charging station? Just put up this sign, and since you have people that are going to be parked here for 8 hours, they can get a full charge while they're here, and they can pay you $1 if you want for the opportunity. And people say, well, it's going to overload the grid. Not at all. An EV plugged into a standard 120-volt outlet draws 12 amps, exactly the same as a toaster, a coffee pot, a hair dryer, or anything else. I mean, that's what the National Electric Code does, limits a 15-amp outlet is 12 amps. And that's what all EVs, whether it's a Tesla or a Nissan Leaf, they all draw 12 amps when plugged into 120 volts. Now, if you're able, if I'm not able to plug in at work and I've got a 50-mile Chevy Volt, I can only go about, say 20 miles or so to work and still have enough energy to get back home. But if I can plug into an outlet that I can find in the parking garage, that just doubled my range, because when I get to work, I plug in there and I'm charging the whole time I'm at work, and I pick up another 50 miles for the way home. So when you double your range, that quadruples the area of your ability to drive around on all electric power. So my family's reduction in fossil fuel began back in 2007, where we were burning the equivalent of about 3,000 gallons of fossil fuels per year for all of our energy needs. That's driving the cars, coal-fired electricity, and 1,000 gallons of fuel. And over time, we slowly replaced the gasoline with hybrids and then electric vehicles. We changed our utility. We just asked them to sign us up for wind instead of general grid power. And then finally in 2013, oh, there's a mistake there. Whoops. In 2013, finally replaced the fossil fuel oil, stinky, black, sooty, 80-year-old monster in the basement with a heat pump. And now our total energy bill is about $8 a month. That's the minimum we pay to the grid in order to stay connected to the grid, so that we always have power. And yet almost all of our energy comes economically from our own solar. This is putting it in dollar terms. We were spending about $6,000 a year annual energy costs, and now we're down to only about $300 a year, mostly for the Prius gas when my wife goes down to visit her grandma, and the gas engine kicks in. So my solar reawakening began in 2010, and I don't have a clock. What time is it, moderator?
Keep going. It's 10:36.
6:36.
Okay, we'll keep going. So I was able to. Normally, I tell people you cannot do it yourself with solar unless you're off grid. And if you're an off grid system, you're going to spend 3 times the amount of somebody that's grid tied, because you're going to be maintaining and replacing batteries for the rest of your life. And then also you have to oversize it to cover the minimum power that you get in the winter. But I was able to do it myself. Had these things propped up on 2x4s and was able to find an electrician that would sign off on it. I mean, we did clean it up a little bit to fully match the code, and he only charged me $400 to do all the permitting, inspections, and everything else. But you have to have the formal permits, the inspections, 100% National Electric Code, follow all the rules in order to get a grid tie meter. Once you've got that grid tie meter, you are in heaven. You can generate all the power you want and store it in the grid. So I was so wrong about solar power all my life, because I assumed that the system was solar panels, a charge controller, and then a basement full of batteries so I could operate as a ham radio when the grid went out. I was so wrong, because the batteries is what eats up 2/3 of the price of the system. The grid tie revolution is you just have solar panels, a grid tie inverter, which are pretty inexpensive, and they just feed into your distribution panel. And if your house needs power, it just goes into the house. If your house doesn't need the power, it feeds the meter backwards and feeds it in the grid. And so there's no buying and selling per se. What you're doing is you're pushing your kilowatt hour meter counter down when you're generating more power, and then it runs forward when you're drawing power. So you're getting full net retail value for every kilowatt that you produce. And there's zero maintenance and storage costs for the rest of your life. I started giving this talk in 2009, and now we're so far below the projections that solar costs less than coal, gas, and any other form of electricity. For example, here's my first 3 kW array. I started thinking about it in around 2007 when they cost about $15,000 for that single array. Now it's down to about $1,500 worth of solar panels for the same power. Solar used to be about $10 a watt. Now it's about 30 cents a watt. And I'm talking about, retail, wholesale, do-it-yourself prices. So, and it's super simple. A grid tie is you just take all those 30-volt solar panels, hook them in series, and you end up with anywhere from 400 to 600 volts DC. Feed that into your grid tie inverter, and out of that is line 1, line 2, neutral, and ground. You run that out to an AC disconnect switch so the utility can disconnect you if they want to, and then you bring it back into just another 20 amp breaker in your distribution box, just like a 20 amp breaker for your water heater. Is no different. You're feeding through that breaker. But off-grid costs 3 times as much, because not only do you have to invest in all of these batteries, but also now you have to run wires as big around as your finger to carry all of that parallel current, which might be 50 amps, up to your charger inverter, and to get the same thing. Major investment in batteries. And remember, I'm not saying operate without batteries. I'm saying I drive an electric vehicle. I have enough batteries to last my house for a week. Okay, now here's, everybody knows or thinks they know that the peak cost of electricity is during the daytime. No, that has not been true since 2013 in solar-rich places like California, for example. In 2013, instead of the traditional line, this thing starts at midnight, goes down through the middle of the night, and then starts coming up around 7 a.m. and goes way up to the top where the word traditional is, and that's your peak power load on the grid. And then it starts going down at 9 p.m. as people come home and turn all their daytime loads off. By 2013, the amount of solar on the grid was equal to the peak load. And by 2017, now it's what they call the duck's back curve, in that the cheapest power is in the middle of the day because everybody is throwing kilowatts at the grid. And oh, and the grid has been able to handle it. All these doomsday predictions of people say, well, the grid can't handle it. Never has happened. Many countries have, on some days, you know, like a weekend in the spring or fall, some countries have gone 100% renewable and their grid didn't go down. But now here is the moneymaker. Look at that ramp needed between about 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. The what do you call it? The bulk, the base load generators have to spin up from nothing at around 5 in the afternoon to peak power in just 2 hours. And so they spend, the electricity costs them 10 to 50 times more during those 2 hours in order to meet that demand. And boy, that's where you can make money hand over fist if you have a Tesla Powerwall, and the grid will pay you for the energy during that 2 hours. So now you don't have to have a whole house battery for a 24-hour storage. You only have to have 2 hours worth of storage, because what you store in there during the day, you can sell back to the grid for 10 to 20 times its normal value, and the battery will pay for itself in 2 years, and you'll have a whole house battery for free. But so far, not even in California is the utility paying you for what the electricity is worth. So I tell people, do not buy a Powerwall battery or anything until the Public Service Commission catches up and will start paying you, the retail customer, when they use your battery power in the evening at the same rate that they have to pay other people. Yeah, so that's just highlighting it. So people say, well, what do you do when the grid goes down? And I say, it's the same thing you do now. You know, completely divorce any thoughts of emergency power from economical power. Solar power is economical power because you can't depend on it on the days when it's cloudy. You'll still get about 10%, but you can't depend on it. So you solve the problem as you choose. I choose to buy to have a $400 generator and a can of gasoline, rather than spending $10,000 for a bunch of batteries, which are only used for about an hour once a year. So most people don't realize that, like I said it before, that 1 hour or 4 hours of power in the middle of December when the grid goes out, that's really about $2 worth of electricity. How much are you willing to spend for that $2 worth of electricity? And so anyway, now I say, don't buy a battery. Buy an electric car, hybrid, and you have all the battery you'll ever need. And now, since we're 10 years into the EV, electric vehicle, and solar revolution, now the Sunny Boy grid tie inverters come with what they call a secure power outlet. It has a 15 amp, 120 volt output that will work even when the grid goes down. So there's your emergency power. And like my system would have 5 of these inverters. So that's almost 5 times 15, that's almost 7,500 watts free power while the sun is shining, even if the grid has gone down. Now, what about like in Japan, you know, with the Fukushima nuclear disaster, both Nissan and Toyota, who sell the most electric cars in Japan, they also sell the vehicle to home interface, so that when you plug your car into your house when you get home, it normally charges the car, but if the grid is out, you can run your whole house from your car, just turnkey. Whoops. But here's what I say, anybody can do it. If you only need to run, say, 20 LED bulbs in your house, just a single cigarette lighter inverter can do that. But if you spend about $100, you can buy a 1,000-watt inverter, hook that to the 12-volt battery in your EV or plug-in hybrid, and you can power almost all the emergency loads that you need. But again, there I'm talking about 60 hertz power. Remember, you've always got tens of kilowatt hours of high voltage DC, and today almost all modern DC supplies will work on that 100 to 336 volts DC direct input without a problem. So what I tell people is, instead of wiring all your panels in series to get around 500 to 600 volt so that you can use standard number 14 house wiring over hundreds of feet to bring that power up to your house, ask them or put in a switch in the middle of it so that when the grid goes down, you can flip that switch, and now you put that connect with two diodes that connects the two halves of your array in parallel, and now you have 15 amps worth of DC voltage in the 250 to 300 volt range, and that's a heck of a lot of power for all of these modern universal power supplies. And when I do all this switching of high voltage, if you go and ask the National Electric Code, they'll convince you got to buy a $350 high voltage, high amperage DC disconnect. And I say, no, you only need to buy a $6 air conditioner disconnect that has the pullout, because it's rated at 60 amps, it's rated at 600 volts. And although you'll get an arc flash when you pull that thing out, there's no question that the arc flash will quench because there's nothing nearby. So when you start realizing you could plug almost, there's somebody that has background audio that's coming in and everybody's hearing. So as I said, almost everything is universal power supplies now. You could plug almost anything into your 200 to 300 volt system, but it won't power anything that you need. It won't power the well pump, the furnace blower, appliances, heaters, your air conditioner, because they all run on 60 hertz. So that's the problem, is how do we come up with the 60 hertz conversion? Do we know who's talking?
Hey, John K7 TV, that's you. Could you mute? There you go.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me, I had to take some caffeine. So anyhow, you got all the power you need. You got high voltage DC. Everything can run on high voltage DC. All we need is a high voltage input to 60 hertz inverter, and those are starting to become available. And here's that article in QST that says, absolutely, if you ever want to do HF for the rest of your life, you've got to preview whatever solar system you're going to install, because one out of the 3 different types of system is an absolute disaster and will wipe out HF through an entire neighborhood. And they're called solar edge economizers. You got to read that article. He had to take his whole look at the 25 dB increase in the noise floor across the HF spectrum, or 20 meters when the sun is shining, compared to when the sun is not shining at night. I'm going to come back to that. So he had to take all his solar panels off and put line chokes on every wire, plus rewire it so all the wires were in tandem as opposed to a loop. You can imagine a loop with 30 DC-DC switching power supplies without RFI protection on them on the roof of your house. But the thing is, yeah, you say you're going to do that or you're not going to go solar. But what happens when your neighbor goes solar? You're screwed until that guy moves out of the neighborhood. And he's not going to, because he's invested that much. You have got to go talk to all of your neighbors within 5, 6, 7, 8 houses and find out if they're interested in solar, and please work with them to make sure they do not buy one of those systems that will totally pollute the neighborhood. Because once they buy the system and install it, you're toast. You're not going to be able to do anything about it. You got to get out in front of this. I want the ARL to really take this on. Anyway, this is a little bit on climate change. Hold on just a second. Yeah, I got 10 minutes. How do I get back? Hold on.
Don't worry about the time. Just go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, most people think, well, the Earth is big. Look at all that water. Look at all that air we have. But if you, it's only the thickness of a sheet of paper when compared to the size of a basketball. You take all the water on Earth, and it's that sphere that's kind of centered over the Rocky Mountains. But of all that water, only the small circle over Georgia is the total fresh water on Earth. So then we took all the air on Earth and put that into a sphere at 1 atmosphere pressure, and that's the total air on Earth. And yet 7 billion people think that they can just burn whatever they want to into that atmosphere that we all share, and it's not their problem. So anyhow, we've got to change our perspective. The typical American home that burns 1 kilowatt hour of electricity per hour is equivalent of 4 tons of coal. And in order to get 4 tons of coal, you've got to do mountaintop mining, and you've got to decimate 80 tons or 4 full train cars full of rocks and debris and habitat and trees into the streams and valleys of West Virginia per house to get that power. This is not sustainable. People say, well, we have enough energy for 300 years. Yes, but there won't be anything left of West Virginia or our atmosphere. So people say, well, mining for lithium is the same, is just as dirty as mining for coal. No, that's what a coal mining operation looks like. What about oil? That's what an oil refinery looks like. This is what mining for lithium looks like. It's going out there with a bulldozer on the front of your tractor, pushing all the salt in this 10,000 square kilometer salt flat in South America, bulldozing it into little piles, letting it dry out a little bit, and taking it in for processing. This is the real picture. I want you to try to understand this. On the left are all the sources of energy in the United States relative to their size. On the in the middle, the orange box is a lot of those energy sources get converted to electricity. And then on the right, the pink boxes are the 4 major ways that we use that power. But all of those uses of power have waste energy. And fully 67% in the upper right-hand corner is that gray, which is all the energy that we're burning that does not get used. It's just wasted heat. You know, everything gets hot. It's just wasted heat. And only about 31% is actually doing useful work. Well, so now let's go look at what is the number one. See, coal used to be the big bugaboo, but in the last few years, coal has demised by tens and 20s of percent, and now coal is on its way out, and nobody had to really regulate it out. It's just not economical. But look at what the number one source is now, down at the bottom, petroleum. That's the number one source of carbon emissions. And if you'll follow that from the left to the right through transportation to the dark gray box, which is the actual energy of that petroleum that's used to move the car, you see it's a huge, huge, huge waste of energy. So now in my next slide, I'm going to see how can we get, how can we get this actual energy to drive the cars from some of these other sources. So let's see if we can get it from renewables. And the ones at the bottom are all fossil fuels. And and most of the energy from fossil fuels, in fact, 70% of it is just completely wasted. Didn't even need to be burned in the first place. Because what we're after for transportation anyway is just the small thing at the right. So we can redraw this and show just solar, nuclear, hydro, and wind already today generates enough power to power every vehicle in America. And that completely eliminates the number one source of carbon emissions and our dirty air. So I'm not saying go out and do this tomorrow, but just recognize the fact that you have to make a major energy decision every couple of years, and you need to have a prepared mind, have thought out what you're going to do the next time you need a new roof, the next time you need a new HVAC system or an air conditioner, or you have a new job or a retirement, or you need a new water heater or a new car or a new lawnmower for that matter. Or every year you get to sign up for clean energy from your utility, even if you can't go solar. So I had this slide before, but I'm just going to reiterate it. And 12 solar panels can fully charge the average American 40 miles per day forever. And if it's grid tied, it doesn't matter if you go 250 miles in one day, because again, the extra solar power that you did on a day when you didn't use electricity is all stored in the grid, and you get to get that back. So again, the average power from 12 solar panels can completely provide electric transportation for the average American 40 miles a day forever. That's about 15,000 miles a day. So the next thing you can do is simply, even though you can't put solar on your house, just go to your utility in these states that offer utility choice and tell them you want your power to come from solar or wind. They'll be happy to sign you up. You might pay a fraction of a cent more, but at least you know you're no longer polluting the air that we breathe. Of course, by now, hopefully everybody's gone to LED, unless you're an HF operator and you have tested some bulbs and found that some of them are a disaster. So that's the other thing you have to do is test LEDs before you buy a bunch of a particular brand to make sure they're quiet. Now, here's the one most people don't realize, and that is a gas lawnmower is 10 times more polluting than the average American commuter car. So that means buying one electric mower for about $200 more, and you can reduce the toxic emissions as much as spending $10,000 or more on an electric vehicle. And you used to think of a electric lawnmower as something you had to push around with 2 full-size car batteries on it, and you say that'd be ridiculous. Well, now the battery in this 21-inch self-propelled electric lawnmower is just that little green. Where's my cursor? It's just that little green thing in the center of that mower. It weighs about 6 pounds, like a 6-pound bag of flour, and that can mow your lawn self-propelled for an acre. And it's equivalent to 11 days of driving in a modern car. Now, the reason is, the engine's much smaller, but it has no catalytic converter. So the #1 polluter in America is all those gas engines and small gas engine operations that don't have catalytic converters. And that's the first thing to get rid of. Okay. The next easiest step is simply buy a plug-in. I like plug-in hybrids because they have the backup gas engine, and so range anxiety completely goes out the window, and yet they have enough battery mileage for everything you want to do during the day, plus field day operations and everything else. The next easiest step is a heat pump, and you used to get a $30,000 estimate when you asked an HVAC person to come in and replace your oil burner or your propane heating system with air conditioner, because they say, well, we got to replace all the ducts in your house. No, none of that is true anymore. We've got all kinds. I mean, yeah, that's the right way to do it, but don't only do that if you're building a new house. Any window air conditioner can be bought as a heat pump unit, so they can both heat during the winter and cool during the summer, and all at double the efficiency of electricity or gas. And of course, we have all these portable hose air conditioners. Again, never buy one of those unless you buy it as a heat pump, because if it's an air conditioner, it's only going to be used a couple of months of the year. Where if it's a heat pump, it can be used all the other months of the year to provide emissions-free, clean heat at half the cost of your fossil fuel system. But the neat thing about it is you don't need to replace your fossil fuel system. Keep that for those coldest nights as your backup. Every heat pump system has to have a backup system of some sorts for those worst days. And so keep your existing one and then just add simple little heat pumps wherever they fit in your house. So these are all the easy heat pumps. In the lower right-hand corner, for under $600, you can buy these motel room type, what do they call them? Split units. So there's an outside unit and an inside unit, and the only thing you got to do to your house to connect them is 2 copper pipes as big around as your little finger. And then in addition, never buy another electric hot water heater again. Buy a heat pump water heater. Up at the top of the water heater, lower left here, is the refrigeration unit for a heat pump water heater. And it's just about the size and current draw of your refrigerator, but instead of putting cold into the water, it's putting the hot coils of the heat pump into the water. And the neat thing about it is, when you do that, then the cold coils are drawing heat from the basement or whatever, and that's a free dehumidifier, because all the water will condense on the cold coils and you get dehumidification for free. So this is what the mini split units look like. They can be added to any house, anywhere. And in a lot of places, you can buy a single outdoor unit and have multiple indoor units, both heating and cooling at half the cost of propane or oil. It's about a break even with gas, but the advantage is you could power this on solar panel or any kind of DC voltage, because most of these have variable compressor units to really get that high efficiency. And if you have variable compressor, that means you've got a DC compressor and an AC controller. And that means the line voltage, the first thing they do is full wave rectify it to high voltage DC, and then they use the controller with that high voltage DC to variable speed the pump. In fact, you can even buy these things that are designed with solar panels as an input. So never buy or replace an AC unit, again, a compressor. When the time comes, buy a bidirectional heat pump. It only costs about 10% more, but it cools, it dehumidifies, and it heats with about 1/3 the cost of electricity. So like I said, these mini splits, you can even buy them that are ready-made to have additional solar panels if you want to, that just tap right into that high voltage DC tap point in there, and they can run on solar power. Now, the rest of this, I'm going to go very fast. It's all about solar. And there's nothing certain in life except death and taxes and utilities. But you can do something about the utilities. You can get 30% back on your taxes, and you can eliminate your utilities for the rest of your life. Now, a lot of people have said, well, I can't go solar because I don't have good southern exposure. That doesn't matter with grid tie solar. That only matters if you're off grid and you have to store up enough energy on the worst winter day to be able to live your lifestyle on that day, or with a couple of days without power. So it requires almost triple the battery capacity, or 5 times the battery capacity than what you typically use. So you can have that power saved up, and you can gain solar optimally on that worst winter day. And if you had a southeast array and you're off grid, you're going to lose the cosine of theta, or almost 30%. And if you go east, you're going to lose almost 50% of your off-grid power. However, with grid tie, none of that matters, because for even an east array, during the summer, the sun comes up in the northeast and sets in the northwest. So you actually have, next slide, even facing due east, you still get 85% effectiveness compared to the ideal south array. Giving up 15% so you can put your solar panels on any side of your house is absolutely worth it. But here's the real killer. If you've got an east-facing array, you also have a west-facing array. So you can actually put 170% of what the ideal south-facing roof can do, and you'll generate more power. Even look to the right. My panels do face more or less south, but I actually put panels on the north side of my house because I can do them at 1/5 the price of a contractor and just hook them up in parallel with my other array. They don't generate anything on those worst winter days, but during the summer, those north panels produce just as much as the south facing panels, because here in Maryland, you know, the days are twice as long, and the sun rises in the northeast and sets in the northwest. Okay, so one other thing. So I said the angle direction doesn't matter much, and absolutely the tilt angle doesn't matter. You don't see anybody with erector sets on the roof of their house to get the angle of the arrays just pointed south. You have to do that if you have, if you're off grid, because you've got to maximize power to the south on the worst solar day. But grid type doesn't matter at all. There will be a time of the year when wherever your panel is facing from east to west, that it'll produce all the power that it doesn't get in the winter. Now here's the tilt angle. Note, I plotted this for my church, and it's a plot of the output of the array from 0 degrees to 60 degrees of tilt. And you'll notice that between 20 degrees to 50 degrees of tilt, there's only 1% difference. And so I use this to convince the church to reduce the tilt of the arrays. Since this is in our front yard, in a residential area, we didn't want it to be so much up and in your face as if we tilted it to 40 degrees. So shade is not always a good thing, and it's also the easiest to fix with a chainsaw. And yeah, it's really hard to give up that big old oak that shades your whole house. but that one tree is preventing you from your own solar power for the rest of your life. And if you chop down that one tree and put up a 6 kW array, you'll reduce the carbon emissions as much as 200 or more than 2 acres of trees. It's worth sacrificing that oak. So give up one if you have to, and go plant a tree exactly where you want it. So anyhow, if you the thing about solar is it's a 10% or more annual return of investment for life, guaranteed forever. There's no other investment I know of that could get that. You know, your bank only gives you 1%. And people say, well, yeah, but it's a 10-year payback. Have you ever calculated what the payback is on your savings in a bank at 1%? It's 100 years. That investment in your bank at 1% interest has to be in there for 100 years before you've equaled your principal. So yeah, it's a 10-year return, but that's 10 times greater than savings. Anyway, yeah, let me go. This is the golden slide. This is my second golden slide, besides the one that says 12 solar panels can power your transportation for life. And that is, remember, everybody has to pay utilities. So let's say you have $12,000 in savings for your retirement, but you have a $100 a month electric bill. That's $1,200 a year. You put that money in a bank at 1%. At the end of 10 years, you've got nothing. Actually, it's 11 years because you did earn $1,200 of interest. So at the end of 11 years, your initial $12,000 savings for retirement is completely gone. You've got nothing to show for it. You've just given it all to the utility. Take that same $12,000, buy a 6 kW solar array, which will cost about $16,000, but it's not a cost. It's just a switch between money in a bank and equity on the roof of your house. Now, the reason I say a $16,000 solar array is because you're immediately going to get back $4,000 at tax time. So you really only spent $12,000. You're also going to get back $600 per year from the utility in solar renewable energy credits, plus or minus, depends on your state. Plus, remember, you're getting $1,200 of free electricity every year for the rest of your life, and you might get some money from the state or county. So let's look at the guy on the left. After 11 years, has absolutely nothing to show for his $12,000 in savings, whereas the guy on the right had from day one converted his $12,000 in savings to a $16,000 self-generating solar array on the roof of his house. He retains the full equity. He gets the tax refund, the SRECs. So he has about $20,000 in equity. He avoided $12,000 in electric bills. He owns his own energy system. So the net value of $32,000 at the end of 10 years. Which would you rather be? The guy who just sat there and kept throwing his money to the utility, or invested his own money in his own solar generating plant and has no utilities for life? Well, you got to pay the utility. Around here, it's $8 a month just to stay connected to the grid. Okay, we're almost finished. It's the best retirement investment ever. And people say, well, you know, should I buy it, lease it, or get one of those companies that'll come out and say they'll do it for free? Well, you know, like anything else, if you don't use your money, then somebody else is going to make all the profit. So if you do one of those deals where somebody else puts the panels on the roof of your house, you're not going to pay a utility bill to the utility. You're going to pay something, maybe 10% less to that solar company for the next 20 years, but you're going to save maybe 10%. If you take out a loan and then use that loan money to buy the solar system, you might save about 25% over time. But if you buy it using your own savings, you're going to save 50% over the time of the thing. Now, a lot of people say, I'm waiting for solar prices to go lower. You know, hey, I just heard last week that they just increased the efficiency by 1%. It ain't ever going to happen. Never has happened. I went back to 1970 when I first entered school, and the cost of solar was about $100 a watt. And even back then, there was always a more efficient cell just around the corner. But the thing is that the standard silicon solar has gone down precipitously by a factor of 100, now almost 300 to 1 by now. And the cost of those more efficient cells just around the corner have done nothing but go up in price, to where now to get 2 times more power by having a higher efficiency cell, it's going to cost you 1,000 to 2,000 times more. And it is never going to change because the Lockheed Martins and space companies will pay anything for 1% more of power on their billion-dollar satellites, whereas the homeowner is not going to spend another dime. And so these curves will never merge. As far as the grid being reliable, all the gloomsday predictions of people never happened. Now since 2018, many companies have experienced days of 100% renewable, and their grid did not go down. The grid managed it just fine. So here, okay, this should have a gold box around it. Listen to this. As I said, unless you go off grid, you cannot do it yourself grid tie. You got to have all the permits, inspections, and I believe it's got to be perfect, or they're not going to let you plug in your grid tie inverter. So I tell people, get the smallest system that you can find a contractor to install. It'll cost you about $2.50 a watt. So let's just say if you have a 2,000 watt system, you'll spend about $5,000. That will give you a fully legal, inspected, permitted grid tie system for about $5,000. After they leave, you can plug anything into any outlet at your house because the National Electric Code stops at the 15 amp outlet in your house. And so now you can go out and buy these $75 grid tie inverters that are flooding the market from Japan and hook up 1 to 4 solar panels to the DC input of that little grid tie inverter. It looks like, a 12 volt, 60 hertz inverter, but it's the opposite. It takes DC in and then what comes out is 120 volts on a standard plug. And you can plug that legally into any outlet in your house. Now, these things are all certified that they'll shut down when the grid goes down and all the other kinds of things for safety. So you're still completely safe. But since it's a plug-in system, you can do this. So I have, that was the slide I was going to put in. I have solar panels on my unused van, on my camping shelter, and on a boat, a solar boat that I have. And so the 99% of the year that I'm not using those 3 vehicles, that's over 2 kW of solar power that I just plug into the extension cord, plug it into an outlet on the outside of the house, and I'm getting full retail 15 cents a kilowatt hour from those solar panels that most people, it would be completely unused. So if you're a DIY person, contract to get a fully legal system, and then think about where you can add additional solar panels. That's pretty much it. Again, don't forget about heat pumps. Especially if you are using oil. I mean, it'll cut your heating costs in half. I mean, the oil system will still have to be there. It'll still run on the coldest nights and everything else, but at least you can put a heat pump heat anywhere in your house. I think that's pretty much it. I'm just telling people, be prepared. Be prepared for that next energy crisis that your family experiences and know what you're going to go out and invest for the future. With that, I will stop.
All right. Well, thanks, Bob. I'll let you lower your screen, your desktop, or I can lower it for you if you want. No, okay. And anybody that's got any questions, you can start raising your hand or putting them into the chat area.
Oh, wow, look at all those. I didn't even look at those while they were going on.
What's that?
I'm ready to chat if you want to go, Jan.
Go again?
I'm ready to do some stuff from the chat.
Okay, go for it.
Is a hybrid better than an EV, or does it matter?
Oh, it definitely matters. It depends on your particular driving style. If you have a second car in the family that can be a gas car, your SUV, your camping vehicle, your pickup truck, then buy an EV that's a battery only because it'll be a lot less, and use that for all of your local in-town use, and then take the family trips with the SUV.
Okay.
Let me say one other thing. Plug-in hybrids are not going to be around for more than a few years because remember, they're the stepping stone to go from all gas vehicles to all electric vehicles. Chevy Volt has already determined that the cost of building a 300-mile electric car or 350, 400-mile all battery electric car is now going to be cheaper than building a plug-in hybrid that has to have both a large battery and a gas engine. So that's why they stopped building the Volt. And so that's why the Volt is Volt, V-O-L-T, is one of the best cars, #1 selling in America for the last 8 years. And it's the best deal ever because it has the largest daily range of battery power, 50 miles, and it has that gas engine backup.
Okay. Now, how long does a solar panel usually last?
They typically lose about 10% every 12 years. So at the end of 20 years, you're still producing 80% of your original power. After 40 years, you're now down to producing 60% of your original power. They'll still produce power forever, but just you're using less and less. But here's the neat thing. What do you think 20 years from now? Don't you think that a lot of your appliances will be 20% more efficient? So whatever array you have today will probably give you the same lifestyle for the rest of your life. And if not, you'll be able to add that 20% back in at probably 1/10 of what the current cost of solar is. So, don't even think about their lifetime.
Okay. If someone says that they've heard that RFI is a common problem with solar, are there any RF quiet grid tie systems out there? At least without having to buy extra stuff anyway.
People speak highly of Enphase, ENPHASE. That was the first microinverters that came out. They attached the back of solar panels. It made sense back when a solar panel was $1,200 each, and the inverter that went on the back of it was $250. But now that the solar panel is only $100 each, it's not really cost effective to do it that way. It still makes sense. These microinverters on the back of every solar panel allow each solar panel to produce full power based on whatever sun is on that solar panel. If you have a series string array like all of mine are, they all have to face the same direction at the same time, because if any one of those panels gets shaded, then all of the power of the entire array is reduced by the amount of that one shaded panel. Oh, that's not true. What will happen is when that one panel is shaded, it will start underproducing, and every one of those panels has diodes, bypass diodes across it, so that as soon as the panel is not able to keep up with the rest of them, it just bypasses the current. So really, this concept of microinverters allow you to keep producing power even under partial shading. String arrays do the same thing.
Okay. When you use your car to power your house, do you isolate your house from the grid?
Oh yeah. I have an AB switch, and really I made my AB switch, instead of a $250 generator panel and everything else, I took 2 of those $6 60 amp pull out disconnects, and then I only have one pull out on a string. It's either in the box on the left, which means the grid goes in to that circuit breaker box, or I plug it into the right and only the car inverter goes into that array. Total cost of about $12.
Okay. Let me see. I'm trying to find the next question. Let's see.
I see somebody says they have trouble at VHF. I have suspected that I might have some problems at VHF in my Prius, because I took all the high voltage panels off of it and experimented with those cars early on and never put the protective panels and grounds and all that stuff back on. And I do notice that I don't pick up even FM broadcast as well as I think I should. But I'm not going to blame the Prius, because it's my own fault for not maintaining good grounding and shielding and all that stuff as the way the car was built.
There's a question about where do you get solar panels, and what is the cost per kilowatt?
Oh, the cost per watt of a solar panel is down to about 30 on sale. Good deals is about 30 cents a watt. So if you get a 250 watt panel, let's say you get a 300 watt panel. Panels are up to 300 watts now. If you get a 300 watt panel, that could cost you as low as $100 from, I like the solarelect.com down in Miami. They're just a wheeler and dealer in bulk sales of, but you got to buy a pickup truck full of them.
Okay. And Tom put a question in the chat, but he also has his hand up. So I'll turn it back over to Dan, because that just covers everything in the chat.
But I do want to say the one thing, and that is that, again, do it yourself. You're only going to be able to do that off grid where you don't have to do the all the permits and everything else. But as I showed you, you can pay the full contractor amount, which is about 5 times more than you could possibly than you might do it yourself for the basic simple array, and then you can add your own panels later.
Okay, Tom, you want to come on up home?
You got to unmute.
W3 TDH.
Yes, sir.
Coming.
Can you hear me?
There you are.
Sorry about that. Yeah, the question is Bob aware that with the change in the 2020 code, that every single house is going to have an external disconnect on it if it's got any major electrical work done to it? Every new service is going to have an exterior disconnect on it. It's for protecting public safety people apparently, but as of the 2020 code, you not only have a service disconnect possibly inside the house, but you will have to have an exterior disconnect on every single home built and every electrical upgrade done.
Oh, that's great. That means the house, when you buy it, is already prepared for grid tie solar as is, and plugging into your car because they've already given you the switch.
Yeah, but it also gives every bad guy the opportunity to shut your house down before he breaks in.
Well, I don't think there are that many bad guys out there.
There's always a negative to something. Okay, Barry, are there any more in the chat there?
One more. When adding additional panels to produce AC, how does the additional panel sync with the grid power?
Oh, the grid tie inverter does that automatically. People need to understand that a grid tie 60 hertz inverter is not an inverter that you put DC into it and it generates 120 volts, 60 hertz on the output. It is a current source that simply uses its electronics to DC convert the incoming solar power to a voltage such that it can push it against the instantaneous waveform of the grid and have the current go into the grid. So it's a current source. It's pushing current into the grid. It's not generating 60 hertz AC power. It's just pushing power into whatever is there. That's why when the grid goes down, instantaneously, the thing stops because it has nothing to push against. And a lot of people think, well, I can use my grid tie inverter when the grid goes down by cranking up my 60 hertz generator and plugging that into my house, and that will fool my grid tie inverter into continuing to operate. Then that person clearly doesn't understand what a current source does, because if you have an 8 kW array that's generating 8 kW into the grid and the grid goes down and your house is only drawing 1 kW of power, that means 7 kW of power instantly jumps up to from 100 to 700 volts in order to keep pushing current. And so that's why they all have to shut down. You know, you cannot fool a grid tie system into because you'll just burn everything up. Well, no, you won't, because the grid tie system will shut down. It will just not push against anything that is not you know, the voltage and waveform that it expects. And you shouldn't even try to fool that.
Okay, well, that's all the questions in the chat now, Dan. So unless anyone
Okay,
has,
and I don't see any more hands raised. I can say from my own personal experience, I put a solar system off grid at my cabin, about 8 years ago or so. The batteries, they're sealed batteries because they're inside the cabin. And so they cost me about $500 a piece. They're not cheap, but it's interesting. My solar panels were far cheaper. That was the lesser part of my cost, but the shipping for that was horrible. But when I had the battery shipped to me, it was almost nothing. It's just how they're shipping them and so forth. So but once it's all installed, it works great. Again, mine is off grid.
Yeah, for the hobbyist who wants to bring on a couple of solar powers to field day or whatever, go knock on the doors not the front door, but the back door of any nearby solar installer and say, hey, you got any extra panels? I'll take them off your hands, for peanuts, because they go out and do a major installation and, they have a few leftover panels and those don't match the panels on the next installation. So they have this pile of panels that's just kind of stacking up, and they'll be happy to maybe to let them go if you find, the guy in the back.
Yeah, there's always, if you happen to live in area where they have that, at the time I did mine, I did not. There was nothing local. There is now, of course. Excuse me. And another way that I had to do at the cabin, because we had mountains that as the sun goes, seasonally goes up and down, the mountains block and so forth. So I had to put in 2 panels of solar panels, but I put 2 controllers in. They're talk to each other. The controllers will pick which one's got the most sun and so forth, and that changes on a seasonal basis. So they kind of offset some. So the only other way I could have done it was motorize them, and in the mountains of Idaho, that ain't a good idea. Ice and snow.
You just reminded me of another very important DIY system, and it's what I did on mine. My initial array was 8 kW, and all permitted, inspected, and everything else. I added another 8 kW simply by those panels were all facing to the southeast, because that's where my yard had the biggest exposure. And I had a bunch of junk trees back in the back of the house that pointed southwest. And so I chopped a bunch of those down and started putting solar panels facing southwest. And so now when the sun starts to begin to shade the southeast panels around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, now the ones that are facing southwest start to be fully illuminated. And so I connected that second 8 kW of solar panels in parallel, through a pair of diodes, to all my existing grid tie inverters, because they're no longer producing from the morning sun, and now they can produce from the afternoon sun. And so I save the cost, which is about $1 a watt for inverters. You can do this if your yard is such that your panels are not both fully illuminated at the same time of day. But even if they are fully illuminated for an hour or so, don't worry about it. You can double the DC input power to a grid tie inverter, and it's not gonna hurt it, because remember, it's a maximum peak power tracking converter, and all it does is it keeps ramping up the current it draws from your solar panels until it gets the maximum power it can get out of it, or its rated power, and then it won't draw anymore. So you're not going to hurt the inverter. In fact, a lot of, because solar panels are now cheaper than inverters, a lot of systems will install 120% solar panels to the rating of an inverter, because 80% of the year when the sun is not at 100%, you're going to produce full power from that array. And yeah, for a few days a year when it's absolutely crystal clear and you're producing maximum power, yeah, you're overproducing and the inverter will not convert that. But look at all the money you made all the rest of the year. So yeah, it's pretty easy to parallel. But the 2 inverters, the 2 strings that you parallel have to be identical in the number of solar panels, because during that transition point, you don't want the maximum peak power tracker trying to, what it does is every second or two, it tries to add a little load, and then do the product of current and voltage. And if the resulting power goes down, it drops off on the load a little bit and sees if the power goes up. And so it's always going up and down, trying to find where it can get the maximum product of voltage and current. And if you have 2 solar arrays that are slightly different, that kind of have different things going on, all while it's trying to do all that, you might end up on a false peak and not be getting your full power. So anyhow, it's an interesting hobby.
Yeah, if there is a difference, I might add, if you're doing it off-grid or on-grid, and you need to make sure you research the battery situation out, your controllers out. There's different kinds of controllers. In my case, I use 2 controllers that talk to each other to offset the differences he was just referring to. There's ways around most everything now, because everybody's had one problem or another they've resolved. Research it out. If it's amateur radio off-grid for a field day, your campers and stuff like that, you have one situation. And if you're trying to get your home into the grid system, that's a different situation. Check them over really careful.
And remember, if you do have an RV or anything that you like to have solar panels to take out in the fields, remember, you're only getting power out of those solar panels for, 3% of the year when you're actually out in the field doing anything. So that's the advantage of being grid tied, is if you're grid tied, while that camper is sitting in your driveway, sitting parked in the sun, you can hook those solar panels to your grid tie inverter and get full retail 15 cents a kilowatt hour for the other 97% of the year.
Okay, Tom, you're back on. Come on again.
I got, since I'm a retired electrician, I found out that I can inquire through battery dealers who has asked them to pick up batteries. And many times they've gotten requests to pick up batteries that are being phased out. And it's not worth it for them to go just for the lead value, which is all the battery dealer gets when they take them back. But it's worthwhile for me to go and pick up 40 batteries and end up, in my experience, with almost half of them that still have a lot of life in them, because they didn't test them individually. They tested the whole array for whatever they were using it for. And I was able to hand those off like party favors to everybody in amateur radio around me and to a search and rescue group and so forth, so that people would have backup batteries. The search and rescue trailer would have batteries and all of that. And what I was doing was a clean off for a company that was moving in one case, and a replacement round trip for a company that was repowering in another case. They paid me to remove the batteries, and half of them were fully usable so that I could turn them around for other use. So if you can get a good relationship going with a battery dealer, they will turn you on to the ones where it isn't worth it for them to go out just for the lead value, whereas you're willing to put the work into testing the batteries and seeing what you can do with them.
And if you think there's a good deal in used lead acid batteries, stand by for the million EV and hybrid batteries that will start to be coming on the recycle market.
I
A
might
lot of
not-
people, because it's about 1/4 the mass and weight of a lead acid. Now, again, in a home installation, who cares what the mass is? You just put them in the basement and you got them cheap.
I need to comment on that if I could. When it comes to batteries, that's I told you we had 4 installations at the cabin, 2 DIY and 2 commercial. That's what the commercial people did. They saved money by putting the batteries in, mix and match. Batteries, try to, if you're going all the time, I'm not talking about your weekends or your field-day stuff. I'm talking about 24/7. Those batteries will kill each other. They will die and they're expensive. Make sure your batteries are good, they're balanced, and keep a good track on them. They can kill you. That's a huge cost there. Midge, you got your hand up.
Yeah, this is probably a very simplistic question, but I have 2 80-watt solar panels and I want to use them. I just purchased them and I want to use them for emergency or disaster. I want to know, how should I position them? Should they be on an angle, and what direction would be the best? They're very, they're not that big.
Oh, you point them south. If you have
Always south is the best.
if you have south sun exposure.
And how are they on a 45-degree angle or
No,
flat?
the angle of the tilt is equal to your latitude. So if you're mid latitude like I am in Maryland, then that's 40-degree latitude, and so you tilt the panel at 40 degrees.
Okay, thank you very much.
But if you're like my house, where most of my sun comes in from the southeast, point the panel to the southeast. That's where your sky is. Pointing at the south doesn't make any sense, because you're going to get some shade over there. So you really generally try to point them due south if you're off grid, but by all means point them at the biggest area of the sky, centered on the biggest area of the sky.
Thank you.
Good source for used batteries, if anyone is interested, is if you have a good relationship with your local hospital district. Each hospital has to replace their batteries every 3 years. I usually do it in a 3-year cycle, and they have to get rid of their used batteries, and those used batteries are still good for years, but by law they have to be replaced by the hospitals. Ask them if they'll donate them to your ham club, and you'll have more batteries than you'll ever need.
Again, I must amplify, if you're doing a repeater site or something like that where it's long-term use, make sure those used batteries are balanced. You got them out of the same set, or you're
Yep.
in trouble. Right out the bat, you won't be long, and you'll be making a trip to the mountain and finding that your batteries, and they'll start dying from the inside out. They don't. It's not the end of the batteries. It's the ones in between there.
Oh,
Okay.
and if there's anything on this group, since you're all affiliated with the ARRL, and you are willing to participate in whatever program I can get going at the ARRL to start switching to solar, send me a personal email. I want to keep a list of those people, because imagine if you can donate for $100 a solar panel that will contribute to the power at the ARRL in your name for the rest of the life of the ARRL. I think that'd be a great money raising system, and would keep them from spending what is it, $100,000 a year on utility bills, which they're currently spending of our member dollars.
Good idea there. Paul, you got your hand up. Paul, KD7.
Yeah, I got
ISA.
it
There you
now.
go.
Yeah, I
Okay.
got it now. On the solar panels, how to aim those. At field day, I hooked up a little watts up to the solar panel to see how well it was charging the battery. And I was dismayed to see that my 200 watts was only pushing maybe 20 watts into the battery. And then what I did was I hooked it up to a hungry battery. And then of course, in goes 130 watts. So if you're trying to position your solar panel, if you use that little watts up, you can watch how many watts are going in, and you can tune it in by looking at the numbers.
Can I interject? You just introduced the #1 problem with off-grid battery systems, and that is whenever your battery is not fully depleted, then you're not getting the full charge current from your solar array. There you were, you had a battery that was half charged or 2/3 charged. And so you could have all the solar power you want, but you're only going to get that minimum power you need to charge the battery. Once the battery's fully charged, your solar panel is doing nothing. And so that's the problem with battery systems, is that whenever your batteries are fully charged, usually by noon or a little bit in the early afternoon on a good solar day, all the rest of the day, the solar output from your arrays is buying you nothing, because it's sized to fully charge your depleted batteries and so forth. And then there was a second thought. You said, oh, and the other thing at field day, of course, is don't point it south. Point it at the sun and send somebody out there every hour to move it, move it, move it, move it, move it. Always point directly at the sun. That's the way to maximize it.
I'm saying for her, if you have the little watts up or something similar, that gives you a digital readout. And
absolutely.
And then on the hospital batteries, I get batteries from my hospital. They'll give me the little lead acid SLA AGM batteries, and I can get them up to 30 amp hours. After that, there's a core charge involved. And at that point, I would think if the ham radio group would approach the hospital, the core charge is going to be very little. But if they need to donate that to the group in your 5013C, I think the organization should get those big batteries, because we've seen 55s, 100s. So you get with your hospital, and if you're nonprofit and they can cover that core charge, you could get lots of batteries from them. I get them all the time from my hospital.
As I'm retiring, and all of a sudden they gave me a bad bill of health, every lead acid battery I find in my basement, my shack, and my garage and everything, the first thing I do is I take it to recycling, because it has absolutely no value to me whatsoever, because I've got 3 electric cars that have over 70 12-volt car batteries full of energy that I drive every day, and they go with me everywhere I go. So the first thing I do with lead acid is recycle them, get the money, and spend them on something else. But again, I'm a broken record, but that's because I believe electric cars are our future. Well, and our present.
I was going to say, if you happen to have a few extra electric cars sitting around, that works. Marty, you got your hand up. You want to take it?
Oh, good evening, and thank you all for the time and the presentation. Yes, if you know somebody who does, and hams are often in this position to do maintenance uh, uh, at city and county radio sites, they also have to replace batteries on a regular basis. And there's a very expensive little instrument called a battery capacitance tester, or a battery impedance meter that will really tell you the true health of the battery better than you could with a an ohmmeter and so on. And when we get a batch of those, we measure them, we mark them, and then we try to get them close together if somebody's going to use more than one, so that they are pretty well matched, as I think, Dan, you mentioned earlier. So if you know somebody who does that regularly, see if they have access to a battery impedance meter, and you'll be able to grade those batteries, and you'll know a lot more about them.
That's very important, Marty. Very, very important. I got one for the cabin and take care of those batteries. They are kind of spendy, but you think about the cost of those batteries and trying to keep monitoring and make sure you're okay. And if you're going to get batteries from hospitals or anything else, it is super important to do that because you need to have those batteries matched as close as possible. Again, we're talking long-term use of batteries, not just a weekend or field day exercise. Okay, Tom, you still have your hand up. Did I not get it lowered down, or do you want to talk again?
Well, if I may, there is a load diverter device that is relatively inexpensive so that when batteries are coming up to charge and you've got more solar capacity than you have need, the load diverter could turn on additional grid tie inverters that couldn't be worked before, and it's relatively minor added expense so that you can bring additional grid tie inverters online automatically when the sun stops. The other thing a load inverter can do is, as Bob was pointing out earlier, and this is the simplest form, water heaters don't care if they see DC or AC. They're exactly like an incandescent bulb. They don't mind a little bit which form of electricity you throw into those heating elements. And you can buy the tanks if you shop through a plumbing wholesaler without any heating elements in them at all, because they're used in oil-fired hot water systems where your boiler is doing the water heating and it's just a tank for storage. They're available. So you can throw diverted energy into water heating and similar loads, and the diverter is relatively minor cost.
Absolutely. And I really looked into that, came up with all kinds of designs because, like you say, electricity is heat. But the one thing you've absolutely, and I haven't mentioned it here, the one thing that we all used to know but have forgotten is that you cannot interrupt high voltage DC. The contacts will open, an arc will form, and it will generate thousands of degrees temperature, burn everything around it, and melt everything to smithereens, and the current still keeps going. But again, all you do is put a capacitor across those contacts called a DC snubber, and the problem goes away. So the thing is when you use a hot water heating element, just make sure there is no thermostat contacts in the circuit, because they will arc over the very first time they open up, and it will not disconnect the current. And so now you're still putting current into a hot water heater that's only getting hotter. And if you've watched what's that realism show, if you ever watched a water heater blow up, it goes through the roof like a rocket, hundreds of feet into the air. So you don't mess around with switching high voltage DC unless you really know what you're doing. Either have good contacts that open more than an inch for that arc to quench, or use a DC snubber, just a capacitor and a resistor. But now you're banking your house on that capacitor and that resistor never failing.
I might add one more comment about off-grid, not on-grid, but off-grid charging systems. Make sure that you don't scrimp on the controller. You can buy controllers dirt cheap. You don't have to go for the most expensive one, but that controller is going to keep your batteries safe from overcharging, from everything. It takes care of the whole thing, gets your worries off, and reports on a regular basis what it's doing. Okay, let's go over and get some more here. Joe, you got your hand up.
Yes, I was wondering if we're going to be able to get copies of the slides.
Yes, I will post them as soon as I get around to it, and I send it to, I guess, Dan?
Yep. Yep, to me.
Oh, actually, I'll send him the URL. I'll put it on my web server. And so all you guys got to get is the URL and you can download it because it's about 30 megabytes. I like pictures.
I'd rather you send them to me or at least where I can download them, because afterwards video links goes out for these, and people that couldn't make it tonight, whatever, has got to see them. So see your stuff too. So we need to have that someplace where I can get to them. I'll download it. You just tell me where it's at.
Okay.
Okay.
Dan, where are you're going to post it? Dan, where will you post these slides so we can get them?
Where will I post them?
Yeah.
Okay. Sometime between the night and tomorrow, I'll be sending out a follow-up email. I always do on these things. And that follow-up email will be a link to the video of our tonight's presentation and all the documentations that went with it. And that's true with all these. You go see those follow-up emails and you'll have all the information regarding the presentation.
Okay, I got the.
It goes out to the SEC Aries email list.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, I send them out to all the SECs. I send them all to the SECs too, but the SMs, the directors, about over anywhere from 500 to now it's getting up there. Well, if you count our reflector, our groups IO, over 900 there will get it. So we have quite an audience that's following this. Okay, Dale. K7 MPZ, Dale. Well, Dale, you're unmuted. Now you're muted
Doesn't
again,
sound
Dale.
like his microphone is working.
Yeah, looks like it. He's muted. And okay, let's go to you, Paul, and we can go back to Dale. Paul, go ahead and take it.
Yeah, this could be a whole nother couple of lectures, but I would encourage everyone to get one of those little watts up meter or similar and a piece of paper. And if you charge your batteries, say to 100% or whatever you charge them to, keep track of your minutes of receiving and transmitting and just watch what kind of power you're using. It's a real education. I have that CBA4 where I can test my batteries and I can even test it according to scenarios. But if you want to test your battery and you get on the net every night or every week, start keeping notes. You'll be really amazed. You're going to find it's a segue from that other one. Once you've tested your batteries that you've charged to 100%, you're going to find out in the field charging batteries from 85 or 90% up to 100 is really inefficient, takes a lot of time. It's not really a good idea. The solar, you're going to be wasting it. So you might want to run your batteries up till the little charger starts blinking green and it's 90. Then see how much power you have. Over.
Good. Yeah, that's a cheap way of doing it, and it's a good way of doing it. Monitor what you got. You educate yourself just by looking at what you're drawing and what you're putting into it.
Dan, while you were talking, I went ahead and uploaded the whole PowerPoint to the aprs.org website, and I put the link there in the chat.
Super. Thank you. Thank you very much. Everybody here can go get that, and I can get it and pass it out. Okay, Dale, are you with us now? He's unmuted. Well, Dale, I think looks like you're going to have to put it in chat. Your microphone does not appear to be working, so you might have to type it over in chat, your question.
Can you use CW?
Well,
You can blink a light. We can try to copy it.
My years in the Navy, I used to go up for practice and do the semaphore thing just with other ships and such, CW. Lots of fun. Yep. Okay, one more time for Dale. Okay. There you are.
Am I there?
You are.
Okay, let me make this quick before it changes its mind then. When I designed the AC solar system for this pretty small station, I discovered I had to change from the house power to the inverter power. And I found these ship-to-shore power switches for boats. They're about 30 bucks, and they're high current. The voltage isn't all that high. I think they're 400 volts, but it's a switch rather than having to pull copper switches out and change over. I can just rotate from shore power. And it also lets you totally isolate the station. Take all your loads off. There's no arcing, there's no sparking. They're only 30 bucks. I was surprised. You can see the size of my hand, the size of the switch. And they're all UL approved.
Yeah, for an off-grid system, be it field day or whatever, those maritime markets got a lot of that kind of stuff, and they're cheaply priced. They work well. It's all sealed. If you're not going to have any arcing problems, if it is, it's sealed. It's a good way to go. So don't forget to look in on those. Research it out well. All right, thanks, Dale. Appreciate that. Anybody else?
Nothing in chat.
Well, we got something. Marty, go for it.
Yeah, one more reminder. If you're going to use a big bank of batteries, make sure you've got the right kind of fuses in there. Those things can generate maybe 50 to 100 times their 20-hour rating in instantaneous current. That you're getting into the hundreds of kilowatts there potentially. And the late Jim Olaf, K6URZ, reminded me of the value of what's called a Class T fuse. Class T like Tango. They come in different sizes, and even the holders are different sizes, so that you don't mistakenly put the wrong size fuse in where it's supposed to, something else is supposed to go. The key feature of those is they have two ratings. One is the normal blow rating, you exceed it by 10% for so many seconds and it goes. The other is called an amp interrupt capacity, and it basically, for example, I use a 125 amp fuse in my deep cycle battery system. And because I'm never going to draw more than 40 or 50 amps, even with multiple transmitters going. But its amp interrupt capacity is 100,000 amps, and it does that by means of having an arc squelching powder inside it. Because as was mentioned earlier, when you break a DC connection, as for example a fuse blowing, you still have the potential to create an arc, and there's enough current there. I mean, you have, moderate voltage, high current. That's called an arc welder. I mean, that's how you do stick welding, okay? And so you don't want that arc to keep going and sustain that short circuit current, say, that may happen by accident. So the Class T fuse is a good way to safely protect your home or your car, or whatever it is. I have one in line with my the wires coming off my starting light ignition battery, which is actually an AGM for running the radios in the car. And so if somebody accidentally does something to short it out, it won't start a fire.
All that's good information, and it's important.
And by the way, you can get those at most places that do solar stuff, and also marine supply.
Exactly right. Also, where they do solar stuff on their websites, they usually have the more quality places will have all kinds of information on how to set these up. And in my case, I went by California standard because I was doing it in a building, our cabin. But you will find specs that are very helpful, and it saves you not only some time and money and such, but it also can save you from burning the house down. Solar panels can catch on fire and have many times, and that's something else you need to look into and protect you on that. Okay, Tom, you got your hand up again.
One thing I wanted to emphasize after what Bob was saying earlier, DC not only arcs on opening, unlike AC, it will also arc on closing. AC is going through several zeros, in other words, 120 of them a second, and that's what will quench the arc on closing. DC doesn't do that. If it's 120, it's 120, it's 120. So when you're closing, you can get an arc. When you're first closing that circuit, and the switch had damn well better be up to it. You'll see in older homes, you take out a switch, there might be a T on the strap, and that meant it was meant to close on tungsten filaments, which when they're cold are a dead short with DC power. They put a T in the strap to say, yeah, this will take those tungsten loads when you first close the switch without burning up the switch.
Okay, I think it's
Someone in the chat made the point that for switches, you have to be sure they're DC rated switches and not AC rated switches.
yes. What I found was a shocker. I have commercial license. I got my amateur extra. I got all that. I thought I knew it all when it came to this stuff. It looked pretty elementary. And I think as Bob will contest, it is not elementary. You need to, it's going to be an eye opener. You need to learn what's the different parts of it. And, or you find yourself not only making big mistakes, but some costly mistakes. And Bob, we're kind of taking the show away from you. Go ahead, Bob.
Who, me? No, I'm just going to wait around to answer any questions, but back to you.
Okay, Dale. K7, MPZ.
Unmute yourself again, please.
Okay, good to go?
Yep.
Okay, when an inverter is disconnected, the capacitors are still charged. You want to put a 30 ohm resistor across those terminals and it'll bleed off that power in just a fraction of a second. If you don't, give it a try. See the arc, you'll be a believer.
Yes, yes. Okay, Medj, go ahead.
This is not my question. This was presented in the chat by someone, or a comment about a plane and whether a plane could have solar panel. And I just thought that was an interesting thought. So that's the question.
Oh yeah, well NASA has all kinds of solar power planes that can stay aloft, certainly as long as the sun is shining. But the whole reason for having a solar powered plane is to stay up there forever. So not only do you have to put up solar panels to power it during the daylight hours, but you have to have enough, double that number of solar panels and batteries on the aircraft so that you could continue to fly during the night, stay up there, and then the sun comes back up the next morning, and then you keep flying. So yeah, it's well demonstrated, but you know, it takes huge investment, millions of dollars. You know, there are only a few people that have demonstrated it. But, you know, in some applications, it's worthwhile. Oh, and the point is that there are a lot of companies now making battery-powered commercial small private aircraft, you know, they'll fly for an hour or two, you know, a typical training session or whatever. It's ideal for that because you go out and fly for an hour, come back and charge it up again for the next one, and you never have to go to the gas station.
Like drones?
Well, I mean, all the drones are, of course, battery powered, but no, I'm talking about full-size 2- and 4-seater aircraft are now starting to come out battery electric.
Yeah,
because when you think about it, the maximum power for an aircraft is during the climb, and then once they get up to altitude, they drop back to cruise mode to maximize their energy. And so that's why a hybrid airplane is ideal, because you have enough batteries to get you aloft, and then a much smaller aircraft engine can maintain that flight, you know, as long as the gas lasts. Now I'm talking about a hybrid electric airplane, but you know, that's the whole new rage. Everybody's working on them.
Okay, do you see anything more there in the chat there, Barry?
Nope, we were all caught up with in the chat.
Okay, I don't see any more hands raised. Okay.
One other thing that I saw was I was surprised that they were starting to electrify tugboats. And you think about the massive batteries and the massive power involved in a big, huge diesel tugboat. And why in the world would you electrify it? And, you know, the guys do a face plant and say, why not? Most of the time, that diesel engine tugboat is sitting there tied to the pier with full diesel running and idling, because it takes so much time to boot up the diesel engine, and you got to have the diesel engine running to keep the electrical load running and everything else. And so you're running all this diesel power, and the tugboat is just tied up to the pier. So what they've done the studies and realized that no, you hybridize that, so you get by with maybe 1/5 the size of a diesel engine, and then just enough batteries, you know, to make up the difference.
Of course, we've been doing this kind of stuff clear back in the early World War II days of submarines, you know, and before that with battery submarines, and they were hybrid stuff. So we've had a lot of years to work it out, and it's going massive speed now. Everybody and their dog's in on this. Okay, I don't see any more questions. Do you, Mary?
We're good.
Well, it's been a good presentation. We lost about half of them through it, and that's something this long. This has been a long one, so that's pretty much expected. Bob, I really appreciate you coming on.
What did the total get up to? Does anybody know?
It was over 190.
Okay. Wow, that's the biggest I've ever presented to. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, Bob, actually you presented more than that, because like I said, when we get this wrapped up, I'll be sending it out via email, and we watch those hits. So people that go out and watch the video, you've actually given this presentation to well over 1,000 hands tonight.
Wow, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Yes, thank
Bob,
you.
73.
Okay, so everybody, I'm going to kill it and let everybody go do their thing.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
7-3.
Okay, good night. We'll talk to you next week about VNAs.
73 is all.
Thank you.